urban response to climate risk, building institutional capacity to mitigate risk and vulnerability. We have all the three speakers in this session who are coming on VC. They are not here in person. So first speaker here is Mr. Krishna Vatsa, who is member of National Disaster Management Authority. And may I request him to please start his discussion or his views. And please try to be brief, between 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for inviting me. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. So I was at one time I was associated with the government of Maharashtra. So I have a little bit of historical perspective on the subject, and I will try to share it. Back in 1990s, urban flooding was not such a serious problem. At that time, we would have some amount of water logging, and we always thought that it's a matter of few hours and the water would drain away. Slowly the problem started aggravating, and that really refers to the long-term this area. 2005 floods actually established the problematic of urban flooding across the country. It was a very strange phenomena because we had very severe flooding in Mumbai suburban area, but the city of Mumbai was largely spared. We had very abnormal distribution of rainfall. Baikala received just 50 millimeters, as Andheri and the areas beyond that had 944 millimeters of rainfall. Since then, the urban flooding has become a really national problem. All the cities are facing this problem in varying degrees. Bangalore, Hyderabad, Kolkata, Delhi, all of them. And which also refers to some of the common problems that the cities are facing, the expansion of the cities and the lack of water drainage, lack of permeable spaces. That's a very serious problem. As soon as the rains begin, the water level starts going up because the water just does not percolate. It has also led to a situation where all the cities are facing water problem during the summer months. It's just the two aspects of the same problem: serious urban flooding during the rains and serious water scarcity during summer months. So basically, this problem is tied to the urban planning, expansion of urban services, also to the aspects of disaster management in urban settings. Now, two things happened around 2005. One was that we had a Disaster Management Act 2005 that was passed by the Parliament, and that brought legislation in this area for the first time. However, one of the shortcomings of the legislation was that there was not enough emphasis on the urban areas. So while all the districts had disaster management authorities, at the city level, there was no disaster management authority. And I think it did contribute to lack of disaster management planning at the urban level. And Mumbai too suffered somewhat. Mumbai has a very complex governance context. It's the Mumbai Municipal Corporation that really takes all the steps, all the measures for disaster management, whereas the disaster management authority existed at the level of the district collector. So there was a serious anomaly, institutional anomaly, which I want to highlight. However, disaster management as a significantly in the city, Mumbai, the BMC invested heavily in disaster management. Now it has a very well functioning control room. It has a lot of weather stations. It can It can provide some nowcasting. All those things have happened in a very short period of time. Around 2005, there was another initiative by the government when government appointed Madhav Chitle committee to ascertain the causes of Mumbai flooding. And Madhav Chitle committee is very, very detailed report, still a very valid, very relevant report. It's a comprehensive report about how to deal with the urban flooding, and it also does refer to several environmental issues. Now, some of the recommendations of the Madhav Chitle committee were implemented in Mumbai. And we had significant investment in Brimstone Ward project. Perhaps we didn't pay enough attention to the expansion of the natural drainage. We still had major encroachments, Miri River, Dahisar, Poisar, all those rivers, and for various regions, these encroachments could not be reduced as effectively as they should have been. As I mentioned, the context of urban governance is always very complex. But now I think there are many other developments that have happened. Now we are also proposing a disaster management authority at the city level. There is an amendment on the anvil. The second thing is this, that the has also provided a major funding for to deal with the urban flooding. There is a national recognition of the problem of urban flooding. So for all the 7 most populous cities, it has allocated a certain amount of money to deal with the problem of urban flooding. Mumbai BMC is also a rich municipal corporation. It can allocate resources. MMRDA can also allocate resources. What is important is that now that the governance certain initiatives really created a very good situation where a national initiative in urban flooding can be launched, and it can also be done in the context of the city of Mumbai. All the stakeholders can come together. But what is important is that both the environmental measures and disaster risk reduction measures, they need to come together. It cannot be done alone by the BMC. I think I feel that MMRDA had a great role to play. MMRDA can play a role in assessing the risks on an evolving basis. Mumbai is also now seriously exposed to the flood, to the risk of cyclones. So apart from the flooding, the cyclone also has emerged as a serious problem. So both the MMRDA and the BMC need to act together. And on behalf of the NDMA, I would like to say that we are very keen to work with these urban institutions to address the problem of urban flooding on a long-term basis. So this is in brief my intervention. I would be happy to respond to many issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vatsa. I think besides the preparedness of how to deal with flood, prevention part is also equally important. And BMC has, in a way, initiated a lot of good things. They can actually enhance it in a way that the prevention becomes the starting point. So I'll go to the next speaker here, Ms. Suruchi Bhadwal, Senior Fellow and Director at Earth Science and Climate Change Division of TERI. May I request Ms. Suruchi to please start your discussion points which you want to share with us.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity of interacting on this platform. I hope my slides are visible. I have a few slides for sharing my views. It's basically the work that TERI's been doing with coastal cities in the context of integrating climate risks into development planning. And I would like to basically share some of the work that we've been doing over the years with different cities. So with that, basically moving on to my next slide. Okay, I hope you can see the next slide. So the context basically is that we all understand India has a huge coastline and of course 2 island union territories that are highly exposed to the vagaries of weather conditions and also an enhanced climatic conditions. So we know that there are risks attached to it, and therefore we need to basically address those risks and see how we can respond effectively to those risks. Coastal regions definitely, when we basically talk about climate related risks, are uniquely placed with the exposure to additional elements of risk, largely with regard to sea level rise and storm surges, apart from the impact on other sectors and other kinds of climate risks that we basically experience in other parts of the world and in inland areas. So gradual increases in temperatures and precipitation changes in patterns of rainfall, humidity conditions, etc. But apart from that, I think the unique feature that we basically observe with regard to coastal regions is that, you have a coastline and of course the sea levels are rising, and then of course the exposure to cyclone incidences, different intensities of cyclones striking the coastline. Of course, apart from these climatic factors that we are talking about, which pose a risk, the risk cannot be seen in isolation with other factors, and definitely geographical factors and other biophysical factors play a very important role with the degree to which you are basically exposed and vulnerable to the consequences of a changing climate that we're talking about. Now, in this context, basically, we are concerned with regard to the kind of terrain that we have across the coast, whether it's a low-lying terrain or possibly a terrain which is in a position where it's better placed in terms of addressing maybe consequences of a 1 meter or a less than 1 meter sea level rise that we are possibly expecting, and also other aspects that relate to the erosion factors of the beaches, the coastline, and issues related to subsidence that we observe in certain parts of the country in the coastlines. Apart from that, while all sectors seem to be important, when talking about agriculture, water resources, how health is likely to get affected, there are 2 other sectors that basically we've observed become very important in the context of coastal regions and cities, that is to do with tourism and infrastructure and how these 2 sectors are likely to get affected. Of course, impacts which are specific, as I said, it's sea level rise, storm surges, cyclone incidences, and a trigger-off effect with regard to coastal and inland flooding that we basically experience, heavy precipitation events that we've observed in some of our cities, human discomfort levels created by the wet pulp temperatures going high, and of course, increasing demands as a result of all this with regard to energy, water, food, and other services that basically get created. This is spatial modeling that we tried to do for the Mumbai city, basically trying to see, simulate a heavy precipitation in, incidents that had occurred in the city a while back, just to understand which are the, hotspots within the city which get affected primarily, given a certain condition that is imposed on the city. And in this case, it was the occurrence of extreme precipitation in the city over a period of 2 to 3 days, resulting in the waterlogging of many parts of the city and basically bringing the city to a standstill. So, so the kind of simulation that was done using a hydrodynamic model was to understand the hotspots, the locations where basically the government or the municipality needs to focus on first and foremost in terms of taking some corrective steps to be able to resolve the issue, if at all, and these incidences were to become more frequent and repeat themselves in future time periods. The kind of modeling and simulation that was done to assist the government, actually this was work along with the government of Maharashtra to see what was the percentage of area that was getting flooded because of the nature of the event that struck the city, and then what was the different degree of water depth that got created in different parts of the city. So a large part, more than 30 to 40% of the city was actually covered above the 0.05 to 4 meters, between the 0.05 to 4 meters level of water depths, and about 38% of the city was basically, affected with major flooding, and therefore there were large hotspots that were identified where possibly the governments need to focus on and intervene to see what kind of measures can be taken forward. So the question that basically we have for ourselves when we do such kind of assessments are that what are the infrastructure services in cities likely to be affected and therefore have a huge socioeconomic impact on people living within these cities? Where are these hotspots where we need to intervene? What are the vulnerable points we are talking about? And that need to be targeted to ensure a response that can effectively address the risk, as in many cases, all of this links up to the investments that are needed, either for new measures that we're talking about or for grading up of existing systems and infrastructure. The core areas that definitely we basically feel when we talk about a city are related to the water services and how they get affected in terms of provision to the people and the communities, sewerage and drainage systems and the quality of water, how does that get affected, the transport network, road networks and other networks, so horizontal and vertical spreads of the road network and how they get affected in terms of being waterlogged, social infrastructure, tourism and telecommunications, and these are core areas of functions within a city, which basically, if were to get affected, bring the city to a standstill, given the occurrence of an extreme or striking of an incident which puts the city out of gear. And this is basically a mapping of the roads of the city to see, with an incidence of a high flood event or waterlogging condition, how the different road networks basically get affected, and mapping of these roads within the city to understand which road networks are going to be highly affected compared to the others, where possibly the city, municipality or administration can focus on improving on certain elements, including drainage of those roads that may allow for reducing the impact of waterlogging and exposure to a certain kind of risk to communities living in and around those areas. So preparing for the response, and again, another piece of study which we're doing for some other cities like Goa and Vizag in the coastal regions of the country. First and foremost, I think what we basically felt was the requirement for profiling of the city, identifying the high and low points of the city, understanding the contours on how the city is placed in terms of, getting affected. What are the concerned impacts? Are we, concerned with regard to the occurrence of heavy precipitation, events, or with regard to flooding and waterlogging in certain regions? Or is it heat stress that we are concerned about because the city is likely to observe very high temperatures, and of course these conditions may continue in the future? Therefore, a thorough understanding of all these aspects, one is the profiling of the city and the nature of the impact that we're talking about, is needed when we're talking about responses. And to begin with, I think an preparation of an inventory of the entire city in terms of its infrastructure and services, starting off with development as a point of preparing the response and preparing the city for a better response to climate risks is the requirement and is a felt need. A digital elevation model, so a detailed elevation model that basically helps us support, understand that, and of course, a lot of collection of data with regard to the different sectors that I talked about to understand how these services are being provided and how the infrastructure is oriented. And definitely, just to give you some examples of the work, this is a development process where we've helped the cities develop a database management system
Bhadwal,
with regard to
request you to please sum it up quickly because we have...
So sure, I'm just going quickly. So this is a database management system, so collecting information with regard to different sectors, feeding it in for the city and the city administration, developing spatial maps of elevations and overlaying the database management system with the elevation models to look at which are the points which basically with regard to different services getting affected, looking at the sensitivities by every ward and location of the city, mapping it with regard to the risks that is being addressed, and then basically looking at the response measures, both with regard to man-made infrastructure that is likely to get affected and biophysical infrastructure, mangroves and sand dunes and creeks and Kazan lands that are likely to get affected, and looking at enabling measures, including capacity building and awareness generation that can basically be targeted and looked at. These are the different sets of measures in the mapping with regard to biophysical measures and man-made services and infrastructure and measures for them in case they come to stand still and get affected because of these climate risks that we're talking about, providing the guidance to authorities and the administration in terms of what they can look at with regard to action, with regard to different areas that basically, we are talking about in terms of looking at in terms of addressing the risks. And in conclusion, basically, such kind of an exercise working with the administration and the municipality is only a first step in terms of demonstrating or understanding how the risks basically play out and what actions can be taken. But of course, there's a whole lot of action basically left out at the city level with the administration in terms of seeing how this can be executed and implemented along with its various departments. Of course, we do need inputs from experts and scientific institutions in terms of their guidance in the whole process while city administrations are at action. Therefore, capacity building and continuous engagement with institutions becomes an important part of this whole curve. In assisting the governments in terms of staggering the actions that are being talked about over a period of time, whether it's on the short to the medium to the long-term period that we talk about. Creating enabling mechanisms, including policy and regulatory frameworks, allocation of appropriate finance for the implementation processes, and building the capacities of stakeholders in the process would be crucial, as we basically are talking about actions in various areas and services to be provided. At the end of the day, there is a lot of support that would be required at the city level and the ULB level in terms of supporting the administration and the organizations, and also basically in certain cases, point made earlier that rather than looking at these interventions in isolation, maybe we need to look at an integrated multi-sectoral approach in terms of executing many of these actions that we're talking about, and therefore we need, at the institutional level also some kind of a coordination framework which will help us cut across different institutions in terms of, providing a holistic solution to the kind of risk we are talking about. And with that, I would just close my presentation and look forward to the comments.
Thank you very much. We do have a lot of questions relating to this, but we'll go to the end of this session and then we'll come back to you. Thank you very much. So we'll straight away go to the last speaker of this session, Professor Purnamita Dasgupta, who is Chair in Environmental Economics and Head, Environment and Resources Economics Units of Institute of Economic Growth. Professor Purnamita Dasgupta was also involved in the negotiation. Okay, so she had to leave for some other thing since we got delayed. So maybe we can close this session. Oh,
no, Purnamita is right here.
Oh, okay.
I can see her.
Okay, we got an information that you had to leave. So we are glad to see you again. She was part of Indian delegation for negotiation on this IPCC team as well, where we were there together. So we'll not lose many minutes now, Professor Purnamita. So 5 or 7 minutes, if you can put all the important points which you would like to speak on this topic on urban response to climate risk. Over to you.
Thank you. I have a few slides, but if you want, I can just skip them and I can just stop.
The time remains same. You can use the slides and speak both.
Oh, okay. Let me try to share my screen. I don't know. No, this is not the one. I don't know. Let me try. Seems to be some issue here. Can you see my screen if I share it? I don't know. Can you see my screen?
So you go ahead. It has some time lag. So you go ahead with your talking. It will come up the screen.
I see. So you can't see it as yet?
We can see it. Those of us online, we can see it.
We can see it.
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so let me begin by thanking the organizers. Thank you for inviting me. The advantage of being the last speaker is that so much has already been said and so many valuable ideas have already been shared that I have the luxury of picking and choosing on some of them and adding in my 2 little bits. Let me state at the outset, I am no Mumbai expert, though it is a city I love to visit. So what I say based more on experience in working in different sorts of contexts, and particularly with reference to the flooding context. So I don't know if you have already seen this slide at some point in this conference in the morning, but this is something that comes straight out of the IPCC AR6 Working Group 2 report on adaptation, which was released in February this year. And there, if you see in South Asia, they have flagged Mumbai as one of the cities which is at risk and also offers at high risk and also offers several adaptation options to deal with those risks. So I thought this was a good context to start with, because there itself, they've also mapped how much progress the city has made on different heads, including in terms of institutional, infrastructural, ecosystem-based, and behavioral measures. And I will leave it at that, and those who are interested may like to read and see what the international community or the scholarship community right now considers to be Mumbai's progress in terms of adapting to risks. Now, this session was, I think, designed to talk about building capacities for response options. The first point I'd like to flag is that let us not forget that response options can span a whole range of sectors and can be on different fronts. So while there are certain processes that should be in place, irrespective of the type of response option that we opt for, it could be an engineering or technological response, it could be a social response. The idea is not to prioritize one over the other. I mean, from my experience, I have understood that while it is true that we need voices that continuously remind us to not forget different kinds of options, because we tend to think science is what comes out of a lab, or science is what comes out of, or technology is what comes out of a factory. The fact of the matter is we need all of them, but let us not start prioritizing one over the other. That often gets into a sticky business, because we are, after all, a developing country. We have our development challenges, and our adaptation has to be co-designed with development. It cannot be at the cost, one cannot be at the cost of the other. And these are very practical, pragmatic ideas. So it could be as simple as building a hand pump on the first floor of a multipurpose cyclone shelter. It could be as simple as that. Or it could be going in for some very sophisticated water supply systems which do not get impacted when the flooding takes place. And most of these pictures are based on field work in different parts of the country. Awareness building is a large part of any amount of capacity building, and as has been referred to earlier, the Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan is sort of a pioneering activity, which is now picked up by more than 23 cities, including Mumbai, which is seen to be as one of the more progressive ones on the Heat Action Plan. Let us also flag that the choice in choosing what works as mitigating climate risk and what works as adaptation, works as development that does not lead to adaptation is tough. It's very, very evolving, it's dynamic. At certain points in time, we could never foresee that what we see today as what we saw as adaptation 20 years ago or 30 years ago would end up as maladaptation 30 years later. So it's very easy to turn around and sometimes blame policymakers and implementers that they got it wrong. Just as voices should be constantly heard across the spectrum, we have to be careful about what is maladaptation, and we must give that knowledge supremacy. But at the same time, let us remember the role of uncertainty. I want to really get into one key aspect, and that is the aspect of valuing, costing, and the economic side. Now, this is something that is still fairly nascent, but when we know that ultimately the economics of it has to work for being able to convince decision makers often that this is what you do, this is what you need to do. One part of it is to find the finance. We often know what should be done and what is right, but there are tough choices when our resources are scarce and we have to allocate them. It's equally tough, but if we have the economics, it makes it easier. And this is what I have sort of, my own experience has been that often implementers do come forward, they do join hands when you can demonstrate that there are so many benefits to getting the adaptation right. So for instance, I want to give, so this is something that we did. It was an implementation-oriented research study in one state in India, in a district which was very prone to flooding, highly prone to flooding. And it's interesting that I just will take 2 minutes to share the story with you, is that, you know, I was hired to go in there, I was asked to go in there, not hired, to go in there and do an assessment of what are the adaptation options in agriculture because fields are flooding all the time and crops are getting damaged. But when I went in there and started speaking to the women who were mostly doing the agriculture, and I asked them, do you have problems? What kind of problems? They said, you want to really address our problems for flooding? I said, yes. So they said, our main problem is a health problem, which is that we suffer from weakness and tiredness after floods. And that was really strange to me. I said, why would that be? They said, because during flood events, we eat less because we don't have access to toilets. And many low-lying areas, in both urban and in peri-urban, urban and rural areas of the district, used to lose access to toilets, which was a big issue for the women. And so they used to eat less. You know, it's something touched me over there. And I dropped the idea, and I must say, I had great support from from the funding agency, from the state government, and they just said, yes, go ahead. What do you want to do? So I started making inquiries, and we looked at different designs, technologies of of toilets, which could be put into flood-affected areas. And they said, hey, but it's more expensive than to do the simplest one, which was then, you know, sort of the kind of costing that was provided for the kind of benefits that could be given for building toilets under the standard program that was running at that time. But once we did the economics, and you needed the science, you needed to build those scenarios, and we found that even for the here and now, in terms of the averted health costs, in terms of the convenience benefits for the disadvantaged women who didn't have, who obviously did not have access to the kind of toilets that many of us do have in our homes, the benefits were so huge, and that it was possible then to leverage the government funds along with some private sector CSR funds to actually implement these. So the simple idea is that the costing matters, the finance matters, and what matters is how much we talk to the stakeholders and how we go in with a plan which is not seen as stop-driven, but is seen as something that other speakers have also so very rightly mentioned earlier, which is seen as something that takes into account all the stakeholders, remembering that there will be gainers and losers in this transition process to becoming climate resilient. And one way for me, when I wear my economist hat, is to be able to actually demonstrate that on the ground, the finance and the costing works, the avoided damages, the value of the avoided damages can so much outweigh the costs and build in transition costs as we become climate resilient. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Professor Purnamita. The way you gave examples made many of these points which are very difficult to explain otherwise. Thanks for your time, and thank you for holding on to the delayed arrangement that we had. So since this session has ended, we are running late, but if we can have 2 very quick questions, otherwise we would lose this essence of Q&A that we are planning to have, and then we will close this session. So any questions? No comments, please. Only questions. From all the speakers who have spoken, those speakers who are here, they'll answer. Those who are not, I will try my best. Okay, so it seems audience have understood each and every word spoken. Thank you very much. And thank you especially to all the speakers here in this session who have been able to explain things in a very lucid manner. What comes out very clearly is that each of these solutions have to be site-specific. One solution does not fit everywhere, and that's why the local solution, nature-based solution, again nature-based solution of one country will not go very well in the other country. We need to be very, very specific, and that's why running through multiple set of so-called experts and as well as common people as well, because villagers sometimes can tell you a lot of good things, what is likely to work over there, rather than we going and telling them this is best for you. So thank you very much, and thanks to Mumbai First for letting me moderate. I'm sure you all enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.